ये शान है ये मान है, वतन का ये सम्मान है, चले वतन इसी से है, यही मेरा अभिमान है, ये मेरा संविधान है। लोकतंत्र ये गणतंत्र है, न्याय की ये नीति है, संपन्नता की रीति है, कानून की दलील है, कर्तव्य है, अधिकार है, विचारों का अंबार है, स्वराज भी इसी से है, इसी से वतन महान है, ये मेरा संविधान है।
भारत की मिट्टी के बारे में कुछ अनूठा है, जो कई बाधाओं के बावजूद हमेशा महान आत्माओं के लिए आराध्य बना हुआ है। Today, as we celebrate the Constitution Day to commemorate the adoption of the supreme law of Indian land, we must not forget to pay a tribute to Mahatma Gandhi, whose principles are clearly reflected in the very essence of the Constitution, and the chief architect and father of our Indian Constitution, B.R. Ambedkar, who held the office of the chairman of the drafting committee. Under the difficult times of partition, India was met with the challenges of national unity and integrity. In such unprecedented times of partition, Sardar Patel took upon himself the daunting task to unify all 565 princely states into the independent India. On this Constitution Day, we also pay our homage to this astounding leader who combined in himself the true features of a nationalist, catalyst, and a realist.
In words of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, one of the architects of the Indian Constitution, preamble is a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, fraternity as the principles of life and which cannot be divorced from each other. This was the vision under which the preamble of our Constitution was laid down. Not only does this provide to us the clarity behind our Constitution, but also helps a common man connect to this comprehensive document.
We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India
into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to give to all its citizens
justice, social, economic, and political,
liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship,
equality of status and opportunity,
and to promote among them all fraternity,
assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation.
in our Constituent Assembly this 26th day of November 1949.
do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution.
संविधान सभा की कुल सदस्यता 389 थी। इन 389 सदस्यों में से हम सभी उन अग्रणी पुरुष सदस्यों को याद करते हैं जिन्होंने भारतीय संविधान का प्रारूप तैयार करने में मदद की थी, परंतु संविधान सभा की उन 15 महिला सदस्यों के योगदान को आसानी से भुला दिया जाता है।
Let us now take a moment to celebrate these 15 strong, intelligent, and crusading women who overcame all social obstacles to put together one of the most lauded constitutions in the world. Some of these 15 women included Dakshayani Velayudhan, Hansraj Jivraj Mehta, Begum Aizaz Rasool, Durgabai Deshmukh, Ammu Swaminathan, Sarojini Naidu, and Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. Today, we pay homage to these women of our Constituent Assembly who defied all challenges and left no stone unturned to formulate our Constitution.
संविधान की कार्य प्रणाली इस बात पर निर्भर करेगी कि लोग भविष्य में स्वयं का संचालन कैसे करेंगे, ना कि कानून के वास्तविक निष्पादन पर।
These were the words of the only Dalit woman of the Constituent Assembly, Dakshayani Velayudhan. She provided another unique perspective upon the debates on reservations and separate electorates for the Dalit community, which continue even today.
Mr. Chairman,
Before I express my views on the resolution, let me pay my humble homage to our revolutionary father Mahatma Gandhi. It is his mystic vision, his political idealism, and his social passion that gave us the instruments to achieve our goal. Sir, now that the draft is before us for general discussion, I request you to permit me to express my views on the same. The able and eloquent chairman of the drafting committee has done his duty creditably within the scope of the general setup of the new state of India. But this does not mean that I have not got any criticism about the draft. I fear that the Constituent Assembly, from the very beginning of its formation, showed more interest in things other than making a constitution. We hear daily speeches made by our great leaders and their ideals and principles, but in the Constitution, we find that it is barren of their ideas and principles. We have got leaders of national and international importance, but in our Constitution, we find that those principles and ideals are absent. The general criticism is that the draft is a replica of the 1935 Act. But we cannot forget the fact that we have got a legacy of the British imperialist administration. Just as the British administrators wanted to keep India centrally and provincially as a single unit, we tried to bring India centrally and provincially as a strong unit. And this centralization of power has led to all the troubles. There are two ways of making India a strong unit. One is by the method of centralization of power, and the other is by decentralization, which now goes under the safe words democratic methods. But in this draft, we cannot find anything that is democratic, and decentralization is totally absent. It is a great tragedy that in making the constitution of a great country with 30 crores of people, with a great culture behind it, and the great principles and teachings of the greatest man of the world on the surface, we were only able to produce a constitution that is totally foreign to us. For example, we find that the direct recruitment to governorship is taken from the Government of India Act, and it shows that we have not even left out a comma from it. Also, sir, I cannot understand why there should be centrally administered areas under the new constitution. The British kept these areas simply to have the military rule in the country. It is better that these provinces are merged with the adjoining provinces, and thus we will not be losing anything. Then I want to say a few words about the socialist demand at this stage. I must say that though they have a large following, I do not agree with their demand that this Constituent Assembly should be buried. I have to make one suggestion. The present Constitution, when it comes into force, will be put before the public by way of the general elections. Then, this Constitution can be made an election issue, either for its acceptance or rejection. If the majority of the electorates accept the constitution, then we can take it that the whole country has accepted it. If the majority of the electorates reject it, then we must take it that the whole country has rejected it. And the party that comes into power and the legislature that will be formed thereafter can take up the constitution and make the amendments that are necessary. The working of the constitution will depend upon how the people will conduct themselves in the future, not on the actual execution of law. Thank you.
गांधी जी की अनुयायी, सामाजिक कल्याण की रक्षक और महिला अधिकारों की चैंपियन थी जी दुर्गाबाई देशमुख.
One of the important female architects of the Indian Constitution. She emerged as a staunch advocate for a free judiciary, this need for which is as integral and relevant to the basic structure of the Indian Constitution as it was earlier.
Mr. President, sir, the speakers that have preceded me have placed before you in a highly learned manner an exhaustive analysis of the constitutional setup which this country is going to have. Sir, there is only one standard by which we have got to judge this constitution. The purpose of a democratic constitution is to find a device, to establish a machinery, to find out the general will of the people, and also let the general will prevail. Does this constitution fulfill this object? That is the point to be considered. Sir, with the franchise extended to all adults, the ample checks provided to control the executive, and the fundamental rights solemnly guaranteed by the Constitution, I do not think any fair minded person would say that this Constitution does not fulfill that democratic purpose. May I say, sir, that it is not or should not be the purpose of the makers of the Constitution to give the color of a particular political ideology to the Constitution. And it is well that it is left to the people, and the people should be left alone, and they should be the masters to shape the destiny of this country and also to mold their machinery as they like, as long as they hold the field. So, it is possible for a socialist to complain that the principles of his own party do not find a place in the constitution. But ours is a constitution which is neither socialist nor communist, or even for that matter, a Panchayat Raj constitution. It is a people's constitution which gives free and ample scope to the people of India to make experiments in socialism or any otherism in which they believe would make this country happy and prosperous. Sir, it is said that there is nothing Gandhian in this constitution. Look at the chapter on fundamental rights. It has always been bitterly criticized in the House that the fundamental rights are not worth the paper on which they are written. Is it supposed that because the fundamental rights are hedged in by certain restrictions, they are absolute trash? These restrictions on the fundamental rights are completely in consonance with well recognized restrictions in the whole jurisprudence, not only of this country but of the whole world, and the constitutions of various countries. The rights should not be absolute. Sir, I have often heard the criticism that this constitution has not laid down the duties of the citizens. It has laid down only the rights. I do not want to say much on the restrictions which have been placed on the fundamental rights. While claiming his rights under the Constitution, the citizen should as well remember that he has got an obligation and a duty to the state from which he expects his rights or his protection. I conclude my speech with these words.
हम सिद्धांतों, रूढ़िवादी सिद्धांतों की नींव लोकतंत्र के आगामी चुनाव के लिए नहीं, बल्कि आने वाले दिनों के लिए, पीढ़ियों के लिए और राष्ट्र के लिए रख रहे हैं। इसीलिए अब अपने लाभ को छोड़ नैतिकता के सिद्धांतों पर विचार करना अति आवश्यक है। यही विचार थे एनी मैस्करीन के।
Annie Mascarene believed that centralization of power was essential for a successful democracy till the time it did not lead to democratic tenets being altered. Our constitution today provides a scope for this centralized yet quasi-federal structure, the ideas for which were propagated by Mrs. Mascarene.
The President, sir, after listening to the speech of the Sardar, I feel that all my difficulties with regarding to the state have disappeared. Section 306B had rather been a disappointing one since I had come across it, and I had thought that in the making of a democratic India, the states are going to be under the Roman-like tutelage for ages to come. I do not wish to flatter myself, but the South Indian states had been territories in which democracy had been given its first advent. Universal adult franchise was introduced in India by Travancore and were introduced before any other province could even think of them. The wisdom of the Smart of India, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, had been too deep for us to understand. He had so molded the destiny of democratic India that states which are already quite advanced are on par with the provinces, and the states which are to advance hereafter are given a safety valve so that they may develop without fear. The other point which strikes me is the importance of centralization of power. The Confederation of Germany as molded by Bismarck, today finds a place so difficult on the map of Europe that European administrators find it a problem to dismember them. The example of Venizelos in Greece and Sun Yat-sen in China are enough to convince us that this Bismarck of India is an administrator whose wisdom and experiences are unequaled. The state's people now feel that they are no more going to be tyrannized by autocracies. 40% of Indian territory and 23% of the population are now on par with the provinces and provincial subjects. So much so that the molding of the destiny of democratic India is made easy. We should congratulate ourselves that we have made history. Being a poor country of 400 million people, we have adopted democracy, which is considered to flourish only in a rich country. I pay tribute to Sardar Patel for unifying democratic India without bloodshed. Jai Hind.
किसी ने सही ही कहा है, साहस की परीक्षा तब आती है जब हम अल्पसंख्यक में होते हैं, और सहनशीलता की परीक्षा तब आती है जब हम बहुमत में होते हैं। कुछ ऐसे ही विचार थे बेगम आइजाज रसूल के।
A woman propounded for her journey from Parda to Parliament. Begum Aizaz played a key role in establishing an affirmative action towards the minorities of our country. Such a protective discrimination still constitutes a fundamental part of our constitution.
Sir, I congratulate the Honorable Dr. Ambedkar for this lucid and illuminating exposition of the draft constitution. He and the drafting committee had no ordinary task to perform and they deserve our thanks. As a woman, I have very great satisfaction in the fact that no discrimination will be made on the account of sex. It is in the fitness of such things that such a provision should have been made in the draft constitution, and I am sure women can look forward to the equality of opportunity under the new constitution. The question of the reservation of seats for the minorities has engaged the attention of this House. It is true, sir, that last year, on the recommendations of the Minority Subcommittee, this House accepted the principle of the reservation of seats for certain communities. At that time also, I was opposed to the reservation of seats, and today again, I repeat that in the new setup with joint electorates, it is absolutely meaningless to have reservation of seats for any minority. We have to depend upon the goodwill of the majority community. Therefore, speaking for the Muslims, I say that to ask for reservation of seats seems to, in my mind, quite pointless. But I do agree with Dr. Ambedkar that is for the majority to realize its duty not to discriminate against any minority. Sir, if that principle that the majority should not discriminate against any minority is accepted, I can assure you that we will not ask for any reservation of seats for the minorities as far as the Muslims are concerned. We feel that our interests are absolutely identical with those of the majority and expect that the majority would deal justly and fairly with all the minorities. At the same time, as it has been pointed out by some honorable members in their speeches, reservations of seats for the minorities in the service is a very essential thing, and I hope that the members of this House will consider it when we deal with that question. In conclusion, sir, I would say that whatever we put in this constitution, we must see that all our efforts are concentrated to make India strong and prosperous, with equality of opportunity, happiness and prosperity for all, so that India may lead the countries of the world on the path of peace and progress.
The success of a constitution lies in the cooperation between our fundamental rights and the directive principles of state policy. From time immemorial, leaders have tried to strike the perfect balance between the two, both of which add to the supremacy of our constitution. Ammu Swaminathan was one of the significant leaders who called for this balance, the need for which also prevails ever more urgently today.
In one of her last speeches, she said, and I quote, हमने इस संविधान का प्रारूप तैयार किया है और हमें इसका पालन करना होगा। हमें अपने अधिकारों को प्राप्त करने के लिए काम करना होगा और हमें नीतियों के ऊपर राज्य नीति के निर्देशों को लागू करना होगा। तभी हम उस भारत को प्राप्त कर सकेंगे जिसकी हम आशा करते रहे हैं।
Sir, the passing of this constitution for an independent India can be called, without exaggeration, the realization of a great dream of 400 million people. The first picture of the great man Mahatma Gandhi comes to my mind, who by years of untiring work made it possible for us today to be an independent country. If we are to deserve this constitution, we have to make up our minds to work it into something alive and something that will benefit every citizen of this country. We have to see that the ideas and ideals which are on paper are implemented by the people of this country. The Constitution gives us fundamental rights, equal status, adult franchise, and the removal of untouchability, things for which India had been fighting for all these years. But these things appearing on paper are not enough to make this country happy and prosperous. The Constitution rests on two pillars: fundamental rights and directive principles. Fundamental rights guarantee freedom of speech, association, and worship for all. Equal rights for both men and women will help them shoulder their responsibilities to make India a great country. Fundamental rights give civil and political rights. Directive principles, which ensure moral rights, constitute the basis for social and political democracy. For the Constitution to work properly, every citizen should not only be assured of his rights but should also know his duties and responsibilities. Freedom is not to be used for doing anything that anyone likes. Freedom does not mean license. Let us hope that the Constitution will be considered worthy of our country. Though there are many who find fault with the great number of clauses in it, I hope they will remember that our task was a very difficult one. I feel that it has been a great achievement to have been able to bring all divergent opinions together and frame the constitution of this kind, which has been agreed to by a very large majority. I hope that some of us will live to see that the Constitution becomes a real stronghold for human rights and it will work towards establishing a real democracy so that there will be happiness and prosperity for everyone. Sir, I conclude my speech strongly supporting that the Constitution may be passed.
हम सभी जानते हैं कि एक आजाद भारत सफलता की राह में एक शक्ति है। वैश्विक शांति और परस्पर संबंध के इस युग में हम अलग अलग राष्ट्रों की बात नहीं कर सकते। हमें क्रम से काम करना होगा और एक ऐसी दुनिया बनानी होगी जहां भारत वैश्विक शांति की ओर एक योग्य भागीदार हो।
Keeping in mind this idea, Article 51 of our Constitution talks about global peace and universal brotherhood. Having a far-sighted vision, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, who was one of the leaders who significantly added to this idea of security and peace, the relevance of which is more seen today than ever.
Mr. President, it was my privilege in 1937 to move the first resolution after the inauguration of provincial autonomy in my province. which demanded a constituent assembly to draw up a constitution for an independent India. Today, 10 years later, that constituent assembly is meeting here. This is a historic milestone in our progress towards freedom. I am sure that we can all recall the appalling state of United Nations when it was first born in San Francisco. The Asiatic nations assembled there, but were never given a chance to speak independently, and they pathetically echoed the voices of their respective imperialist powers. I would like to point out that it is a matter of great pride that perhaps for the first time in history, at the last United Nations Assembly, India, a country not free herself, was able to confidently raise her voice for the freedom of oppressed and dependent people all over the world. The United Nations has recognized India because she has shown within herself today a power to give a lead to the world, and we mustn't overlook that. A free India would no doubt lead not only Asia but the whole world. So today, as we meet here in this assembly to draw up the future constitution of our country, we must not forget that we owe a duty to not only our people but to the people of the whole world. It is through our design for living we shall be helping other nations decide the pattern of their own lives, and for that, our design must be right. Throughout the years of all Asiatic countries, India has alone stood for democracy. The people of this country have adhered to the ideal of democracy, even at great peril and personal sacrifice. Today, we are finally in a position to show the world that we can implement our ideals. We have pledged to build a socially democratic state that would enable India to fulfill her destiny and point the path of lasting peace and progress to the whole world. At this moment in our national history, we cannot afford to fritter away our energies in any talk, action, or fear that might defeat our objective. We must accept the challenges and march together to achieve our goals. A free India must become a power for the forces of progress. By the means of the resolution before us, we redeem the pledge that we have taken. I appeal to the members of this House to pass the resolution.
हम गहरी सच्चाई का मकसद चाहते हैं, भाषण में अधिक से अधिक साहस और कार्यवाही में ईमानदारी चाहते हैं.
This powerful verse was put forward by Sarojini Naidu. Sarojini Naidu played a pivotal role in the adoption of the national flag in the Constituent Assembly. Her contribution towards women's right to vote and universal suffrage still resonates in the Indian Constitution.
I speak on behalf of that ancient reborn mother with her undivided heart and indivisible spirit, whose love is equal for all her children. Many times in my travels abroad, I have suffered the most terrible moments of anguish because India possessed no flag. On the day when peace was signed at Versailles, there were flags of all nations decorated in the Opera House. An Indian near me, with tears in his eyes, turned to me and said, "When shall we have our own flag?" The time will soon come when we shall have our own flag and anthem. It was a moment of anguish for me when a few months later 42 nations sent their women to an international conference in Berlin. There, they were planning to have a flag parade of the nations. India had no official flag, but at my suggestion, some of the women Indian delegates tore strips from their saris, sitting up till late hours to make the tricolour flag, so that our country should not be humiliated for the lack of a national banner. But the worst anguish of all was a few months ago when, on the inspiration of Jawaharlal Nehru, the nations of Asia met and affirmed the unity of Asia. On the wall behind the platform, there was the flag of every nation of Asia. Big and little countries were all represented, but we had exercised a self denying ordinance so that we might scrupulously pledge that no party politics would be permitted at the conference. But today we retrieve that sorrow and shame. We attain the flag of free India. There is no spirit of separation in the heart of India. That wheel, what does it represent? It represents the Dharma Chakra of Ashoka the Magnificent, who sent his message of peace and brotherhood all over the world. Does it not represent the chakra of my illustrations and beloved leader Mahatma Gandhi? Does it not represent the rays of the sun? Jai Hind.
हमारे लोकतंत्र की सफलता के लिए राजनीतिक स्वतंत्रता और सामाजिक आर्थिक समानता दोनों ही बहुत महत्वपूर्ण हैं। दोनों के अस्तित्व के बिना एक नागरिक स्वतंत्र भारत में सुरक्षित महसूस नहीं कर सकता है। यही विचार थे हमारे भारत की आयरन लेडी हंसा मेहता के।
Seeking inspiration from her vision and interlinking her ideas with the sanctity of our Constitution, we have now been able to establish mutual respect between men and women, rich and poor, the haves and have nots.
Sir, in the absence of Srimati Sarojini Naidu, it is my proud privilege on behalf of the women of India to present this flag to the nation through you. I have a list here of nearly 100 prominent women of all communities who have expressed a desire to associate themselves with this ceremonial. There are hundreds and hundreds of other women who would equally like to participate in this function. It is in the fitness of things that this first flag that will fly over this august house should be a gift from the women of India. We have donned the saffron color. We have fought, suffered, and sacrificed in the cause of our country's freedom. We have today attained our goal. In presenting the symbol of our freedom, we once more offer our services to the nation. We pledge ourselves to work for a great India, for building up a nation that will be a nation amongst nations. We pledge ourselves for working for a greater cause to maintain the freedom that we have achieved. We have great traditions to maintain, traditions that made India so great in the past. It is the duty of every man and woman to preserve these traditions so that India may hold her spiritual supremacy over the world. May this flag be the symbol of that great India and may it ever fly high and serve as a light in the gloom that threatens the world today. May it bring happiness to those who live under its protecting care.
तीन रंगों से सजा तिरंगा जब हवा में लहराता है, हर भारत के नागरिक को न जाने कितना सुकून पहुंचाता है। इसमें सत्य और त्याग है, वीरता का निशान है, लहू से सींचकर हिफाजत की उन वीरों का बलिदान है।
If you were wondering how the colors of our flag were chosen and what they signify, then let me tell you. The strength of the color of saffron, the peace indicated by white, the truth which lies in the Dharma Chakra, and the fertility in the band of green, when put together, form the auspicious India, our motherland.
जैसे हर सिक्के के दो पहलू होते हैं, वैसे ही संविधान में दिए गए हमारे मौलिक अधिकारों के साथ हमारे मौलिक कर्तव्यों को निभाना बहुत महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है। As rightly said, with rights come responsibilities, and with the same vision, our constitution provides for 11 fundamental duties, which hold an important place in determining the success of our democracy. So, what does Article 51A Part 4 say about our fundamental duties?
It shall be the duty of every citizen of India
to abide by the Indian Constitution and to respect its ideals and institutions, the national flag and the national anthem.
Cherish and follow the noble ideals that inspired the national struggle for freedom.
Uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of India.
Defend the country and render national service when called upon to do so.
Promote harmony and the spirit of common brotherhood amongst all the people of India, transcending religious, linguistic, and regional or sectional diversities, and to renounce practices that are derogatory to the dignity of women.
value and preserve the rich heritage of the country's composite culture.
Protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for all living creatures.
To develop the scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform.
Safeguard public property and abjure violence.
Strive towards excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity so that the nation constantly rises to higher levels of endeavor and achievement.
Provide opportunities for education to his child or ward between the age of 6 and 14 years.
इसी के साथ हम इस कार्यक्रम को समाप्त करते हैं और आशा करते हैं कि हम सभी अपने संविधान का मान रखेंगे और अपने कर्तव्यों का पालन करते हुए भारत के एक जिम्मेदार नागरिक की भूमिका निभाएंगे। अंत में आपके समक्ष प्रस्तुत है बंकिम चंद्र चटर्जी द्वारा रचित राष्ट्रीय गीत वंदे मातरम।
वन्दे मातरम् सुजलां सुफलां मलयज शीतलां सस्य श्यामलां मातरम् वन्दे मातरम्